Some action figure toy lines go on for years and make a huge impact on pop culture. But like every other toy line, they run their course and they have to end. And sometimes companies try to reboot those franchises. But what are some of those action figure toy lines that didn't make it and faded into pop culture obscurity? This episode, we're going to explore 7 failed action figure reboots. Welcome back, guys. It's Thomas, and on this episode, I wanted to explore some of those toy lines that tried to make it back to the toy aisle and just couldn't make it. We're seeing a lot of these franchises come back because of nostalgia, so modern day toy companies are making them, but sometimes they fail pretty hard. So let's get into this list of these failed toy lines. First on this failed toy line list goes to Starting Lineup. Now, the original Starting Lineup toy line was released in 1988 by Kenner, and it went all the way to 2001, and you can finally get your favorite sports stars in action figure form. They had MLB, NHL, NBA, they even had NASCAR, and they had hockey, which was really cool. So a whole bunch of athletes. They were in these pre-pose positions. They weren't too much fun for me to play with. I like to pose my figures and put accessories on them, but if you were a sports fan, these were fantastic. I remember we even had one that was like sliding into home plate, so the plate was attached to his hand, you couldn't take it off, and you would have them in various action poses, and they'd had a foot stand so they can stand up, so they were really cool. You might even see them in Home Alone when Kevin's shooting them down the laundry chute. But these figures, for the most part, are virtually worthless, pretty readily available on eBay or in vintage toy stores. Fast forward all the way to 2022, when Hasbro tried to re-release the Starting Lineup for NBA. Now, this toy line was doomed to begin with. They started off at $49.99 for a figure, a card, and an NFT, which was pretty stupid at the time. It's stupid now, but these didn't even make it out the door. They were showing up at Ross, they were showing up at Ollie's. The one cool thing I think was awesome about this toy line was the basketball hoop, which I wish I would have gotten just for some background scenery, and I missed out when it was at Ollie's. But it was really too overpriced. I think you had these real life sports stars. They had lots of tattoos. You're trying to make them super articulated. So now you got to put all this deco on. I think where they could have been successful is that company right now doing collegiate heroes of college football teams. Maybe they could have done just generic sports stars where it didn't have anyone's likeness. You didn't have to worry about different tattoos. Just do different skin tones. Give them colors of famous sports teams without the logo, and then this way we can at least put those athletes in our collection. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by Playmates ran all the way from 1988 to 1997. I didn't know any kid that did not have Ninja Turtles, especially from that original line. It was so popular, it was everywhere, it was on our clothes, it was on our school supplies. It was just a cultural phenomenon. When that line did end, I don't think we knew what Turtles was going to become after that. But in 1997, the next Mutation came out, and it was a dud. It was a live action show. I remember it appearing on Fox Kids. The costumes were horrible. The designs were awful. The one cool thing about it is that they introduced a new turtle, Venus.
I was out of the country.
Whoa, Venus!
I always thought she was awesome, but just as quickly as the show faded into obscurity, the toys did just as well. How do you have a toy line with the Turtles and then not have a playset? This might be one of the only Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle lines without a sewer layer. However, I will give them credit. This was probably one of the first live action renditions of sort of a party wagon. They had this Humvee vehicle, and we did get that in action figure form. Luckily, we got some new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 2003. Great show, great toys. Following up every couple years with a revamp. The 2012 series, I think, is pretty fondly thought of, and we've just gotten new iterations since. So TMNT hasn't gone anywhere, but it did have some bumps in the road. The last Star Wars movie just came out. The action figure toy line was about to sunset, and kids were looking for something different. Masters of the Universe by Mattel exploded onto the scene from 1982 to 1987, and these were bigger, bulkier figures. So move aside those Star Wars action figures that were small and scrawny, and now you have these big roided up warrior sci-fi action figures. Obviously it has some cultural significance. The new movie's out now. It's doing awesome. Look at all the different Masters of the Universe lines we've gotten, but the one that probably is a stain on Masters of the Universe history has to go to the New Adventures of He-Man. The whole thing that made Masters of the Universe different were the bigger bodies, the muscles, everything. But then they toned it down. They made the figures for Adventures of He-Man scrawnier. They made him a little taller, and it was just a bust. So I don't know many people that think about this toy line fondly. However, they did go ahead and reuse most of those body molds for Demolition Man action figures, which I always thought was pretty cool. He-Man did eventually get a bunch of releases, but the one I'm thinking of is from the 40th anniversary line, where it was I think it was a 4-pack. It came with a bunch of different He-Man, and I will give this line credit. It did have some pretty cool playsets. Starship Eternia always looked kind of awesome, so at least it was still putting out cool product. It just wasn't able to capture the magic. Mattel released a 12-inch doll in 1999 called Max Steel. Now, I always got this one confused with Action Man. They came out around the same time, and I don't know anyone that was playing with 12-inch dolls. But Max Steel was actually pretty cool. It wasn't as popular in the US, but it was super popular in Latin America. It had one of those earlier CG television cartoons, which I always thought was pretty cool. And this had a very extreme sports kind of gimmick. Main character loves skateboarding, he loves jet skiing. So mix the extreme sports phenomenon with action play, and you have Max Steel. In 2019, Mattel tried to revive the magic again, and I don't think this was super unsuccessful, but I think it's definitely fading into obscurity. They came out with a cartoon. It played on Disney XD alongside Tron Uprising. Also, you had cartoons like Ben 10. I thought the animation just always looked the same. Like, you could take those 3 cartoons and it might as well have been one. They did make some pretty cool toys. They had some awesome translucent plastics and colors. I think what the final nail in the coffin was the actual Max Steel film. For all intents and purposes, it was a box office bomb with a $20 million budget and only making $6 million. So I don't think we'll see Max Steel for a long time. If you were a fan of either of these eras of Max Steel, let me know. Hopefully, Max Steel will have time to shine in the future. Now, while Max Steel leaned on the era of extreme sports, toy lines were going crazy with the extreme, because everything in the 90s was extreme. The real Ghostbusters, released by Kenner from 1986 to 1991, is a cultural phenomenon. 2 movies, the real Ghostbusters cartoon, and we got an awesome toy line from Kenner. Action figures, vehicles, play sets, roleplay items. I remember the Proton Pack. I thought that thing was awesome. Ghostbusters was even in our lunch with the High C Ecto Cooler. But Extreme Ghostbusters came onto the scene in 1997. I actually remember really liking the cartoon. I thought the animation was cool. Egon was back. You had some new characters. There was a new female Ghostbuster. Super fun. The toys were just kind of awesome and like true 90s fashion, bright neon colors, huge giant accessory packs, so they looked awesome. But unfortunately, this one does kind of fall into obscurity, because when people think of Ghostbusters, the last thing they think of is Extreme Ghostbusters. Flash Gordon transcends decades of pop culture. The 1930s, so our grandparents were probably into Flash Gordon, that future retro kind of aesthetic that was super popular with like Jules Verne. Really cool. Our parents were probably huge fans of Flash Gordon too, from comics. Mego made a toy in 1978. Mattel had a whole Flash Gordon line. And then Galoob made action figures from Defenders of the Earth featuring Phantom and Flash Gordon. NECA's even gone back and made some of those Defenders of the Earth. He's made Flash Gordon from the movies, so still pretty culturally significant. But there was a time in the 90s where cartoons were trying to recapture old franchises by having a young version of a character. We had young Indiana Jones, we had James Bond Jr., but I'm talking about Flash Gordon from the 90s. Alex Flash Gordon was a sports nut. He also liked extreme sports. So when Playmates released these action figures in 1997, of course all of the Flash Gordon figures had to come with a hoverboard, even the villains, where I don't even know if that made much sense. And I like these figures. I never saw the cartoon, but I remember having at least 5 of the figures and thinking they were super fun to play with. Flash himself looked like he was a member of the Backstreet Boys, which is super of the times when it came out. But the cartoon was airing on the Sci-Fi Channel. I don't think many kids were tuning in to Sci-Fi to watch cartoons. You probably had more network television cartoons that were getting more airplay. So unfortunately, I think just because out of sight, out of mind, not many people knew about this toy line, and thus were not interested in the toys. Last but not least, on this list, we are talking about G.I. Joe Extreme. Hasbro released a real American hero from 1982 all the way up to 1994. But it wasn't long before Hasbro was trying to revamp the line and give us a whole new take on G.I. Joe. And it was the 90s, so what else to do but have G.I. Joe, but make them extreme. Big muscles, Nerf firing weapons, new characters. You had Sergeant Savage, who was frozen in time from World War II, brought back to lead the group of new Joe characters. My favorite was Metalhead, the hippie of the group. Before I get into it, I'm going to say this. G.I. Joe Extreme is an awesome toy line. If it was not G.I. Joe. These figures were cool. Like, I loved playing with these figures, but even at the time, it just didn't feel like I was playing with G.I. Joe figures. The muscular bodies didn't match the old O-rings, and it always felt off. I remember the one figure, Freight, his muscles were so big, he had like veins popping everywhere. He was actually gross to look at, but they were still fun to play with. And here's what I'm hoping for the future of G.I. Joe Extreme. Now that we have G.I. Joe Classified, I think this is a great opportunity for them to start infusing some of these characters into Classified, so we can get some of those legacy characters and G.I. Joe Extreme in the same scale and now in the same universe. But one figure I think would look awesome in Classified is the main villain, Iron Claw. They did release him in a subscription series way back when, but imagine him in the same scale as Classified, putting him next to Serpentor and Cobra Commander. I think he would be an awesome figure. And that does it for this list of 7 failed action figure toy lines. Did I miss any? Were there toy lines that tried to come back but crashed and burned and I just forgot to put them on? Let me know down in the comments. Love to hear from you. And I hope you did enjoy this episode, folks. If you did, hit like and subscribe. And until the next episode, we'll catch you next time.